Another exciting morning. Welcome back. This is still Wake Up Salon on YV television and radio. Fabian.
Indeed, quite a beautiful morning it is here today. I love the weather. I'm enjoying that. We're broadcasting from our studio at 3 Wesley Street off Edinburgh Road in Freetown, Sierra Leone.
And so indeed, coming up in the program this morning, today Sierra Leone joined the world to commemorate this year's World Seafarers Day on the theme Seafarers' Contribution to Making the Maritime Sector a Safer Workplace. We shall be discussing the importance of the day.
And Stroke Association of Sierra Leone calls on the Pharmacy Board and other agencies to mount a robust inspection and investigation on an expired health drug, the vital amlodipine anti-hypertension tablet that's currently in circulation in the country.
And so I think it's high time we go straight into the conversation. And in the studios this morning, or perhaps the maritime sector in Sierra Leone, we've just been joined in the studios by Tijan Savage, who is a merchant navy engineer officer and the general secretary of the Sierra Leone Seafarers Union. Savage, it's a pleasure having you in the studios.
Thank you.
Also, we have Chibli Francis Camara, who is the acting commissioner, Ministry of Employment, Labor and Social Security. Chibli, as always, it's a pleasure having you in our studios.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning.
Let's start off with Tijan Savage. Today is your day. How exciting it is as seafarers to experience such another World Seafarers Day.
Yes, it's always very exciting to recognize the contribution of seafarers globally. Today is Day of the Seafarer, International Day of the Seafarer 2024. And the theme for this year is the contribution seafarers are making in making sure the workplace is safer. And that's one of the cardinal points of safety at sea. And that issue is covered entirely by the International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea, the SOLAS Convention, which they call SOLAS 74. So it has been a long time that safety of personnel and the vessels themselves have been considered to be critically important in the industry. From the point of doing your design, building the vessel, at every step of the way, it is properly checked by certified surveyors, marine surveyors, to make sure that everything is done according to plan, according to conventions. So today is very important. When I also think about the strides that have been made locally in the industry, there is quite a bit of movement forward, and I think it's something we should be happy about.
On a very lighter note, let's talk of the trade in Sierra Leone. How lucrative it is. Just describe the current atmosphere of seafarers in the country.
Well, if you're talking about seafarers, you have to talk about the shipping industry.
Right. And
the shipping industry in Sierra Leone, the larger part of it is dealing with our bulk mineral resources. You know, the bauxite, the iron ore, the rutile, and things like that. When they are mined, they are delivered to the water's edge, and then the shipping aspect comes into it. You have to move it from that point to final destination. And for us here in Sierra Leone, there's considerable work to be done, from loading the vessel at the initial point to transferring the cargo to much larger ships which are going to China and other places. So it is very important that we pay attention to what is happening nationally, particularly training certification, because there are other conventions which sort of you have to go through before you can get a job on board. So that is also very important. But the shipping industry is becoming critically important for the country economically, because we all know we don't earn enough from our mining materials. So the shipping aspect of it, I think it's something we need to come to so we can determine how we get residual revenue into the country, not everything being taken out of the country. So it's very important.
As important as it is, what are the working conditions of those employed in the sector?
Internationally, I said earlier, it is governed by all of these conventions, but nationally, it is a huge challenge. We have an example of the fishermen. You know, their condition has not improved. We've been saying it for 8 years now. We need to look at the fishermen, because that's the most dangerous job in the world, to be a fisherman. You're in a small boat, high seas, you're always you know, floating out there in very small craft. So we really need to look at that, and I'm sure you guys are aware. You have seen other clips about the condition, even the condition of the vessels, not to talk of the crew. So it's something we have to look at, and I think within the development strategy of the blue economy, something like that will have to be addressed, because in Sierra Leone, the merchant navy is not so pronounced. You know, when people talk about seafarers or anything on the water, the first attention is a fisherman. So we need to really look after their welfare.
Chibili, this brings you into the conversation. Good morning again, and thanks for being here. He just painted, in summary, a picture of what it looks like from the labor and social security perspective. What is the ministry doing to ensure proper conditions of service for them, particularly those in that sector who have employers?
Well, thank you for that question. Well, he's laid the basis for the discourse. He said quite a bit has been done at national level. But in a discourse of this nature, it would have been nice for Ministry of Transport and Aviation and Sierra Leone Sierra Leone Maritime Administration to be here, because we talk about the labor conditions and they focus on the ships. So we need to collaborate. So, but to answer your question directly, so what we have done, first of all, there is an instrument that governs the operation of seafarers. We call it, it's an ILO instrument, Maritime Labour Convention 206. So because of the hazards and risks associated with working on board ships, we decided to push for its ratification. That has been done as a government. Now it is in force. And as a matter of fact, we are supposed to report on that convention this year. And let me also hasten to add that, of course, seafarers are workers. So all the laws that we've enacted, that Parliament has enacted, notably, particularly the Employment Act, is also applicable to seafarers. Yeah? So that is what we have done. So, but there is still a lot more to be done. Because when you look at the Maritime Labour Convention, say for example, Article 3, it speaks to fundamental rights and principles. And when we talk about fundamental rights and principles in labor, we are talking about a group of conventions, 10 of them. And interestingly, Sierra Leone has ratified all of those. And a good number of those have been domesticated in the Employment Act. Say, for example, there is one that talks about prohibition of forced labor. If you take a look at the Employment Act, Section 16, it prohibits forced labor. If you look at 17, it talks about discrimination in employment and occupation. that one also is prohibited. So these are some of the things that we have done at the national level.
And do you do monitoring and follow-up with those employed in the sector to properly understand the challenges and the situations? Because again, it comes more so to those who are employees, not in this context now, not just the fishermen. Those we have even working with the Chinese and other foreign trawlers on sea. Do you do one-on-ones with them to figure out what the situation is? Because if you don't get a picture from them on what the issues are, maybe the violations of their labor and employment rights, you wouldn't know what you're addressing.
You absolutely spot on that. Well, when I was at the junior level, at the junior rank, we used to go on board those trawlers. But to be honest, honestly, now, because of the low level of manpower and other constraints, I am not sure we are doing that on a regular basis. This is something we need to collaborate with Sierra Leone Maritime Administration, Ministry of Transport and Aviation, to make sure that when these ships dock, they notify us, and then we can do joint, it is a joint inspection, so to speak, because you have these instruments, these laws. If you don't implement and enforce, you still have challenges. So I agree with you. We need to be doing regular inspections, not only on board ships, in workplaces generally. And then when you inspect, you pick up these things, you write your report, make recommendations with a view to making sure that the employers will implement the provisions of the recommendation, which will ultimately lead to improvement in the working environment. Because as an institution, one of our core mandates is to ensure there is decent working conditions at workplaces. And when we're talking about decent working conditions, we're talking about freedom, we're talking about equity, we're talking about security, we're talking about dignity.
Let the public be aware at this moment that we invited the Maritime Administration, but none of their representative has showed up in our studios. So we're still expecting them to come. If they come, of course, they will answer to a couple of questions that is, that is stipulated for them. But nonetheless, Chibli, you mentioned the Convention on Maritime in Sierra Leone. Let me take you to Article 3 of that convention. Article 3, subsection C, which speaks to the effective abolition of child labor. When you go to the riverine communities, it is very glaring in those areas that child labor, particularly so for the fishermen, you see young boys, small boys, not young boys, small boys in these canoes. They go about their activities. How far are we in terms of ensuring that what is made theoretical is being practicalized from across various fishing communities?
To be honest, having the law goes a long way. First of all, you have to, essentially you have two main sectors. You have the formal sector and the informal sector. The informal sector, it is actually where the challenges. We'll get there, as I said, once you have the legal framework in place. The next thing is to put in place mechanisms for implementation. Yeah? So that is why I make reference back to the Employment Act. If you look at Part 10, it talks about protection of child labor. And when you look at 95.1, Section 95.1 of that Act, it says a child that is under 15 should not be employed to work. But then, to address those type of issues, there are a combination of measures that you have to take. Because, don't forget, some of those people, their conditions may not be like you and I. There is poverty. So if you want to get them out of poverty, there has to be other social protection measures. For example, going to school, as we have the program now. So if you take them there, they have to go to school. Even the parents, you have to find other means of social protection measures that you can give to make sure that these keys don't go to that trade. So it's going to take time. But as I said, once you have the legal framework in place, in collaboration with other institutions, we eventually get there.
Chibli, it seems more like we've lagged behind to implement most of these sections in the conventions that we talk of on a daily basis. Now, let's just narrow down on Article 4 for Tijan. It talks on the fact that every seafarer has the right to a safe and secure workplace that complies with the safety standards. It speaks more to the theme for this year. But at some point in time, I have seen people who walk around, Kisi Ferry Terminal. I've seen people whose arms have been chopped off in line with them going about their activities in those communities. And when it comes to them being having compensation for the accidents of course they met with in the process of them going about their work, it becomes very difficult. How difficult or how challenging is the situation for seafarers?
It is very challenging, I must say. The local condition has been so way out of track for a long time that we don't practice international standards anymore in terms of maritime. And unfortunately, most of what we deal with in terms of conventions, regulations, and recommendations are international in nature. These are not local laws. So it becomes more challenging when you and we don't put our local craft through that. One, because they are small vessels, and the law requires, to abide by the international conventions, we must be talking about 500 tons vessel or more. So, and most of the vessels we have here are below 500 tons. So there should be a different standard of how you go about handling safety issues. Now, because we are not complying to international laws, we also have not been able to even set up appropriate local laws, like our inland waterway regulation. It's not there. What you're reading now is it's an international document, and part of that has got to be put in our own national context, which is not there at the moment. Of course, you can see it. You mentioned the ferries. The ferries are always overloaded, and you can tell from the watermark. You can be far away and tell that that vessel is overloaded, and everybody sees it. So it's something we really have to get to, and I believe training is going to improve on that, because some people are just not fully aware of the dangers they find themselves in. So I think training will...
What then is the responsibility of the association to ensure those who are not knowledgeable, with regards to maritime issues, are made aware of these challenges that you raise? Because it is only when they know that they will see the need to ensure that we have laws to...
Well, we are doing our part. Honestly, we are not covering every seaman in the country, and the fishermen, they have their own union. But for us, that's why we're here. We have large meetings, workshops, but it's only for our members. So it is not widespread, and I hope in the near future we would have something like that. Not a union, but probably a setup from the ministry that we can be more responsive to the safety needs of our seafarers.
Savage, do the current policies we have as a nation, those we've adopted locally and those we signed to internationally, do they adequately address all the challenges in the sector?
No, even the ILO and IMO documents will tell you that these conventions are not a way of sort of dousing the whole thing on countries like ours, developing countries who may not have the wherewithal to comply with international rules. What they are saying is, this is a roadmap for developing countries. You can take from these and customize them to what suits your own economy, your own country. And we still have not been able to do a lot of that.
Being that you are a part of the sector, what other policies do you think Sierra Leone would need to properly cater to the needs of seafarers?
Policies, I am not too sure, because the maritime industry is full of policies, regulation. Everything is regulated. Even the food you eat on board, it's measured for everyone. So it's a highly regulated industry. I think it has to do with implementation and making sure that people implement what we already have. There's a lot of regulation in the maritime industry, but we have not been able to implement them and enforce them. I think that is where the problem is. I mean, we have the Chinese trawlers on our coast all the time. They're there. They're rusty buckets, I would call them, but they're still there. So that is the problem. We have to implement and enforce some of these regulations.
Your profession is one that is very special, and it has a number of rights that it is being shrouded in. One of which has to do with protection of your health, medical care provisions for you guys, and also fair employment. You have fair employment rights as seafarers.
Sure.
But the practicality of all of these rights are far-fetched. The reason being, I've had relatives who work in this profession. I know the way they live their life and so to speak, how difficult it is, because most of your members are out there lavishing.
Yes, yes, that is correct. Progression. I can remember 8 years ago when I joined the union, nothing was happening. The union office was closed. Nobody was doing anything. Now, 8 years forward, look at where we are. We have been out there encouraging young people. In 2016, we took into the union 1,000 young people. We were able to train 250 of them by ourselves with no known revenue to the union. So we had to use personal funds to do that. And we have gained wide recognition in the country. People know about seafaring now, So I think on our part, we are doing as much as we can as a private, independent organization. We are looking forward, honestly looking forward to government agencies, because they have the regulations, they have their acts to implement, but it's been very difficult to implement anything. I mean, we've gone through it. The welfare of seafarers is key. The human factor in the maritime industry is key. You can build the nicest ships, have your dry dock, have your port. If you don't have the human elements to go in there, you have nothing. So we dropped that ball a few decades ago, and I think we are getting there in terms of training. There is a new push to establish marine training institutes in this country, and that could happen sooner than we expect. So these are developments which we have been talking about, everywhere. We were the only union who announced that Sierra Leone has 500 ships and no one Sierra Leonean on board. That was a flawed contract. Nobody signs those kinds of contracts. So these are we have carry-on issues that we are dealing with, and those officials who made those decisions are not in government anymore. So these kinds of things do happen, and we're hoping that we can get more committed officials to make sure these things happen. You know, we're at our infancy in the maritime industry in this country. And with the emergence of the blue economy, I wonder how we can go to that next level without solving the foundational issues that we have in the industry.
Seems very scary from the picture you're painting.
Well, it is. I'm not going to make any bones about that. It is scary. Because this, I've always said, there is a traditional thinking about seafaring. People think seafarers are dropouts, are wharf rats that you just call upon, come and go to sea, because it was happening like that before. So, but people have not been able to change that perception that we have, you know, mariners who are PhD holders, seafarers who are master's degree holders. So that has changed.
If it's that bad, why become a seafarer in Sierra Leone in the first place? If it's that bad, if the situation is that bad, why become a seafarer in Sierra Leone?
Well, when I became a seafarer, that was in 1975. You know, things were normal. We had about 4 recruiting agencies in the country. Sierra Leone National Shipping Company was formed in 1972, and they, you know, trained us to become officers. So it wasn't that bad at the time. We had 4,000 seafarers, yes, on more than 40 vessels. The Kuwait shipping line alone, we had 35 vessels with Sierra Leoneans on board. So the industry is not new to some of us. You know, we really want to see us getting back on that track. And as I said earlier, I think we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel now because of 1 or 2 things that are happening, which I will not speak about here until the authorities can tell what is going on.
What seems very clear at this moment is from the submissions of Tijan, it's like the marine industry is a new gem in the block, more so with the emergence of mining companies in Sierra Leone that will have to take their resources, their mine resources, to the sea for transport to overseas, because we are not, we don't add value addition to the produce that we have in the country. But again, you also talk of supervision being an impediment to your work. What is the problem?
I actually said the need for us to conduct regular inspections. Of course, field work is not a child's play, it's expensive.
Is resource the problem as many other agencies?
Of course. You have to be mobile, you need equipment. Say if you want to go, you want to check whether electrical systems are working, if you want to check the thickness of metals, etc. There are certain instruments that you need. You just have to get it. Because it's science, you're not going to guess. You need those things, definitely. But I just want to pick on the point you raised earlier when you spoke about compensation, and he said foundational issues are now the things that we need to address if you want to jump into the blue economy proper. So that is why, as a responsible institution, some of the laws he alluded to are really older than you and I. Say, for example, if you take a look at the Workmen's Compensation Act, something like 1940. If you look at the Factories Act, which is basically about safety and health at work, it's 1974. So we've decided to review all of those. As I speak, the Occupational Safety, in other words, Prevention of Accidents at Workplaces Bill, is at the Law Officers Department on its way for gazetting and then to Parliament. The Workmen's Compensation, which we've now renamed as Workers' Compensation, also is on its way. So these are the foundational instruments that you need to prepare a country to actually go into, because you really need to make sure that you put systems in place for you to be able to inspect and monitor. I stress on the word implementation and enforcement. And it will interest you to know that these new bills, the penalties in there are stiffer than what used to obtain in those obsolete laws. So these are the foundational things. Yes, Policies, there are also policies in the making. So you first have the policy, you have your laws, and then you have your regulations. All go together. And then you now require the logistics. It can be vehicles, it can be equipment, and then you need manpower. And then in addition to that also office spaces, because when workers come, they have to sit in offices. We're talking about decent work, you have to be an example. Yeah, so that when you go and meet an employer and tell him or her, this is what should obtain, and he or she visits your office, he should be able to see it. Exactly. So these are the type of things we're talking about. She talked about whether the current laws don't address all the challenges. It will be difficult. First of all, when you are developing a legislation, there are a number of factors that you consider. One, the Constitution of Sierra Leone. Secondly, the international instruments that you have ratified. And thirdly, practice. We've been doing the job, the practice, the experience. You put all that together, and then you come with the legislation. And that is why it will still be difficult, because the world of work is changing. Okay? You can develop legislation 3 years, and they introduce technology that does not capture, the law does not capture. But the beauty about legislation is there are provisions for developing regulations. There are provisions for you to review with the passage of time, so that you will be in line with what is happening. So, as he said in summary, a number of good things are happening. It's just a matter of time for us to actually see it. So I told him when we were out there that you do some of these things, action points, but what you can do that will leave an indelible mark is when you develop a policy, a law, and a regulation. And then that will set the stage for a lot of things to happen.
It looks more like the Labor Ministry only comes in when we have issues of compensation or whatsoever for, CFIAs. That's the only time it comes in, because you're leaving behind most of the other, the relevant things that are on the.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
That's how it looks like.
No, not necessarily. Otherwise, we wouldn't have ratified conventions. We wouldn't have had a good. Very recently, we were in Geneva. We went to the office. We wouldn't have had a very good name at the ILO headquarters there, though we are small. We are paid-up member. We've ratified some of these, all the fundamental conventions. Some of these big countries have not ratified because we saw the need for them to be ratified. He's talking about union. Had the government of Sierra Leone not ratified Convention 87, Fundamental Principles, Freedom of Association and Right to Organize, he wouldn't have been talking about unions. Right to organize and collective bargaining. He wouldn't have had the capacity to sit and bargain with the employers for better terms and conditions of service. Discrimination in employment and occupation, have we not ratified that? He will be discriminated against, and there will be nobody to take any action. But we've ratified all of those, and we've mainstreamed those into the labor laws. What we need to do now is to make sure that we implement the provisions of those laws so that they can bite, and they'll make sure that things happen. So we've done a lot. The only thing maybe probably our weakness is, as a ministry, we don't talk a lot. And one of the good things that has also happened to us is that we've got a minister in the person of a former information minister who is very keen about information sharing. So that is going to go a long way in telling people exactly what we are doing. You say we've done. Let me give you something that we've done very recently. We've developed, the ILO has what they call decent work agenda. We have developed a decent work country program, the second phase. This first phase was developed in 2010 to cover the period 2010 to 2012. We've developed a second one to cover 2024 to 2027. And it has 3 priority areas. One of them speaks to job creation. So when we start rolling that out, you see a number of things happening. But it is systematics, one thing after another, and then you get there. Because the Labor Ministry is law, law, law. Even the decision of the commissioner can be challenged in the High Court. So you have to be careful as you do your job. Otherwise, you run into a lot of problems.
Knowing very well the devastation that the Chinese cause on the waters of Sierra Leone, it becomes very worrying that Chibli is sitting here and saying that supervision is where they have problems because of resources and so to speak. Because we have most of our brothers in their vessels that are there on contracts. They are not employed permanently, and there is disparity in even the amount of pittance they give them on those cargoes. cheaply.
Well, that's why I said we need to be capacitated to be able to go. I myself, my background is safety and health, occupational safety and health. When we were recruited, I told him when we were out there, when we were recruited, we used to sit in the office Monday, Friday for planning and report writing. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays, we were out there. But the situation has changed because of a number of things. And that is why central government need to prioritize the Ministry of Employment, Labor and Social Security. Labor is an important factor of production. If labor is not doing well, productivity level will be low, the economic growth will be low, and that will have adverse impact on all sectors. That is the stark reality. So the political leadership, if they are listening, they have to prioritize labor and allocate more resources to that ministry, so that we'll be in a very good position to be able to do our job. We are doing what we can with the little resources in terms of policy development, in terms of legislative development, of course, with the support of other sectoral ministries. You talked about the waters being polluted. That alone cannot be addressed. That cannot be addressed by the Ministry of Employment, Labor and Social Security alone, because we have our mandate. The Employment Ministry, other sectoral ministry, all of us have to come together and see how some of those things can be addressed. Even the parliamentarians, when they are signing these agreements, they have to make sure all ministries, there is no sector that does not have labor and employment implication. So I said at one time to the Legislative Committee on Employment and Labor that when they are signing these agreements, they have to make sure the Ministry of Labor is there at the very beginning, so that we can insert labor and employment provisions in those agreements that will protect workers, the workplaces, and the environment. But if you don't do that, then you come back to the point that you are saying they only call us when there are disputes. That is not what we want to do.
Okay,
although that is part of our work. We really want to be proactive to make sure we create the enabling environment for decent work. And that will boost productivity.
Now we're going to read out some of the messages on our Facebook platform. Usman Prince Kavoni says, the implementation is not the issue. The issue is to enforce what has been implemented and uphold it with integrity.
Hossam Conte says, even government stated ferry timings and no more observed. For example, it stated that 2 p.m. ferry move, but it's move at 2:50 or 3 p.m. That shows total disregards of time in maritime industry, and passengers are really embarrassed. This unfortunate situation happens purely with Eastern ferries.
Osman Kavonigan says the main problem with our ministries, agencies and departments is that they don't collect data and analyze the data for indicators and areas of concerns.
Swissman says, ask the man if those who have sustained damage to accidents have ever succeeded in having insurance benefits, because in my observation, since our national insurance company came into existence, our insurance companies always collecting money from people instead of paying people who have lost their body parts by accidents, and some even lost their lives without insurance benefits. For those who have, I think this one is not clear, but it's talking of insurance for those who have accidents during work.
Ronald George Stone says, how can they protect labor rights when they are out of themselves instead of the millions? Well, they're out for themselves instead of for the millions whose taxes boost the economy.
Some countries also says child labor is seen everywhere. Just come to Tagrin when the ferry slammed. As for the fishing boats, underage children are seen in those boats for the rest of the day with fishing nets. A typical example is at Sibad, Sawako Water Dam area in Lungi. Small picking them day. Small picking them with rubber balls on their heads in the water whole day.
Osman Kavunu says, give us a data of how many public, private and non-organization companies that are operating in Sierra Leone, how many permanent workers, full-time workers, government and contractors, labor-ready workers in the country?
Last for mind is from Ronald Georgestone, who says, can you tell us how much the fishing, sea transport and minerals extracted out of Sierra Leone, and how much the country has collected in taxes and in profits for the last 5 years, as it is the duty of the public to know? I guess you will say you don't have the figures, but shouldn't it be online for the public? That's last for my end.
And Usman Kavan says, to do away with child labor, we should first register all workers into the computer and collect data information on the workers. Give them ID cards for every job, so when the authorities go to the different companies and businesses, they will ask for ID cards to identify children who are child laborers. Gentlemen, your response to the messages? Yes,
well, I'm afraid the first person is not technically grounded in what he's saying. Implementation covers all of that, actually. You know, implementation and enforcement covers all of that. The other person said data. I agree. Data is a challenge. So that is why the program that I alluded to earlier, the Decent Work Country Program Phase 2, there is a whole component in there for the establishment of a labor market information system. That is one of the things some of us want to leave behind as a good indicator of labor market governance, because once you have that, it will serve as a platform for job seekers, employers to upload vacancies. Those who are looking for jobs can go in there. So on a daily basis, we should be able to know the jobs that have been notified, the people who are working in particular sectors, etc., etc., etc. But that work is ongoing. And then, in addition to that, the ICT wing of the ministry is currently developing a jobs app in the absence of a labor market information system to enable us to know exactly the number of jobs, you know, that have been created. Insurance, well, we don't, that is not our mandate in insurance. What we talk about is compensation. That's why I said earlier, even in view of the obsolete instrument, we still compute compensation that is due victims, and they get those. It cannot be for every, because first of all, the law provides that you notify the accident. It is when you notify that we'll be in a good position, first of all, to go and investigate, to know the cause of the accident, to prevent recurrence, and then the next phase will be to compute the compensation that is due the person, of course, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health. Out for themselves. Well,
sorry to interrupt you there. We would not fully capture your responses in time. We would go on a quick break and we'll come back to continue this conversation. It's 9 o'clock. We would go on a quick commercial break. This is Wake Up Sierra Leone.
Rocalcium Copper Plus